There are truths so dangerous that governments don't debate them. They erase the people who discover them. This is the story of the man who survived and proved them wrong. Subscribe for stories that don't make headlines. February 18, 1977. London. Freezing rain falls onto a quiet North London street as two men step out of a townhouse. Their coats are already soaked. Their hearts are hammering so hard they can barely breathe. Inside that house, they've just spent 3 hours interviewing a former British Army signals officer. What he told them wasn't gossip. It wasn't speculation. It was testimony about a secret so sensitive that even Parliament doesn't know it exists. Duncan Campbell is 25 years old. A journalist. Calm on the surface, shaking underneath. He reaches into his coat and makes sure the cassette tape is still there. 3 hours of recorded evidence. Names. Locations. Programs that don't appear in any budget. Listening posts scattered across the globe. An entire surveillance apparatus operating in total secrecy. On that tape, the source, John Barry, a veteran of British signals intelligence, explains that Britain is monitoring radio and telephone traffic on an industrial scale. Not enemy communications. Everyone's communications. Duncan doesn't need to understand everything yet. He just knows one thing. If he gets this tape home, nothing will ever be the same. They make it exactly 14 steps. Then they stop. Out of the shadows, men in dark overcoats move fast. Badges flash under the streetlights. Special branch. Before Duncan can react, his arms are wrenched behind his back. Cold steel bites into his wrists. Someone reaches into his coat pocket. The cassette tape is gone. Duncan is slammed against a wall as rain runs down his face. He's told he's under arrest. Within hours, he's sitting in a cell, charged under the Official Secrets Act, accused of receiving information useful to an enemy. The maximum sentence is 14 years in prison. A journalist, treated like a traitor. Not for leaking secrets, but for asking questions the government didn't want answered. What the officers don't understand, what the people who ordered this arrest don't yet realize, is that this tape was never the real danger. Because even as Duncan sits in that cell, the truth he uncovered is already larger than him. There is a network out there. White domes rising from the English moors. Satellite dishes buried in the Australian desert. Listening posts in New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. Every single day, this system pulls hundreds of millions of messages from the air. Phone calls, emails, private conversations between people who believe no one is listening. 5 governments built it. 5 governments swore it didn't exist. And the most dangerous part? Duncan Campbell is just getting started. The arrest is meant to end the story. Take the tape. Lock up the journalist. Let the secret collapse back into silence. But the machinery Duncan has stumbled into is far too large to be hidden by one set of handcuffs. Because what he's uncovered isn't a single operation. It's a system. Across the English countryside, white domes rise from quiet moorland, smooth, featureless shells hiding satellite antennas pointed at the sky. Thousands of miles away, in the Australian desert, massive dishes sit under the sun, aligned with the same narrow bands of orbit. In New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, remote listening posts hum day and night, quietly connected by secure links no civilian ever sees. These places aren't isolated. They're synchronized. Every day, the system pulls roughly 300 million communications out of the air. Radio traffic. Telephone calls. Transmissions that were never meant to leave the people who sent them. Signals are captured, sorted, and fed into vast databases where computers search for patterns, names, and keywords. Not occasionally. Continuously. This isn't surveillance aimed at foreign enemies alone. The architecture doesn't distinguish between borders or passports. Anything that passes through the right frequency range becomes fair game. 5 governments built this system together: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. An intelligence alliance most people have never heard of, operating in near-total secrecy. Inside classified documents, the system has a name: Echelon. Officially, it doesn't exist. There are no public budgets, no parliamentary debates, no oversight committees briefed on its full scope. And that's what makes Duncan Campbell so dangerous. He didn't discover Echelon through a leak or a confession from someone high inside government. He didn't steal classified files from a vault. He found it by noticing what didn't add up, by reading declassified papers no one else bothered with, by applying physics to satellite orbits, by following technical breadcrumbs the system assumed no civilian would ever connect. That's why his arrest isn't just punishment. It's a warning. Because if one journalist can see the outline of a machine this vast, then the greatest threat to it isn't espionage. It's exposure. And the people who built Echelon are about to realize they didn't stop the investigation. They accelerated it. For the British security services, this arrest isn't an overreaction. It's a continuation. Because by 1977, Duncan Campbell isn't an unknown journalist who accidentally wandered into classified territory. He's already on their radar, and has been for years. 1 year earlier, in 1976, Duncan published an article titled "The Eavesdroppers" in Time Out magazine. It was the first time Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency, GCHQ, had ever been named publicly in print. Until then, GCHQ was an open secret that officially did not exist. The article detonated inside Whitehall. The consequences were immediate. Duncan's American co-author was deported from the United Kingdom within weeks. The message was clear: foreign journalists who crossed this line would be removed. But Duncan was British. They couldn't expel him. So they chose another option: surveillance. Almost overnight, his life changed. Unknown men began appearing behind him on the street, keeping just enough distance to be plausible. Cars parked outside his flat and stayed there for hours. His phone developed a familiar, unsettling click, the sound of a line that never quite disconnects. At just 24 years old, Duncan Campbell was being monitored by his own government. Not because he carried a weapon. Not because he belonged to a radical group, but because he had demonstrated a willingness to look where he wasn't supposed to. In the internal logic of the security state, that made him dangerous. By the time Special Branch stepped out of the shadows in 1977, this wasn't about one interview or one cassette tape. It was about a pattern. Duncan had already shown that secrecy alone wasn't enough to protect sensitive systems. That a patient outsider, armed with curiosity and technical understanding, could begin to map the edges of power. The arrest was meant to stop that pattern from continuing. Instead, it hardened it. Because Duncan Campbell wasn't driven by ideology or ego. He wasn't trying to embarrass the government or become a public figure. What motivated him was something far more difficult to suppress: the need to understand how hidden systems actually work, and who they're built to serve. That curiosity had already put him under surveillance, and it was about to carry him far deeper into the machinery of the secret state than anyone expected. The government doesn't need to win this case. It just needs to make an example. Within hours of his arrest, Duncan Campbell is formally charged under Britain's Official Secrets Act. The accusation is blunt and chilling: receiving information useful to an enemy. The maximum penalty is 14 years in prison. For a journalist, it's a professional death sentence, and a warning to anyone else watching. The case becomes known as the ABC trial, named after the 3 defendants: Aubrey, Barry, and Campbell. It unfolds not like a normal criminal proceeding, but like a controlled demonstration of state power. Large portions of the trial are held in secret. The public is barred from hearing testimony about surveillance programs that directly affect them. Evidence is discussed behind closed doors, justified by the same logic used to hide the programs in the first place. National security. But as the proceedings drag on, something goes wrong. The illusion cracks. The jury foreman is exposed as a former Special Forces operative, a man who had been actively lobbying for conviction before the trial even began. The revelation detonates inside the courtroom. What was meant to look like due process suddenly resembles a staged performance. The judge is furious. The prosecution scrambles. The credibility of the entire case collapses under its own weight. In the end, Duncan is found technically guilty on a minor count. But the punishment is nothing. No prison. No fine. No meaningful consequence. He walks free. The official secrets charges, the ones meant to silence him, disintegrate like wet paper. What the government intended as a public warning becomes a public embarrassment. Instead of disappearing, Duncan Campbell becomes more visible. Instead of retreating, he becomes more determined. But the most important moment of the trial doesn't happen in the verdict. It happens in a mistake. During testimony, a witness casually mentions a British signals unit based in Cyprus. The reference is brief, almost accidental, but the reaction is immediate. The judge forbids the unit from being named in open court. The witness goes pale. Prosecutors panic and move to shut the line of questioning down. For Duncan, the moment is electric. If one remote base in Cyprus is quietly intercepting global communications, then it isn't an anomaly. It's a node. And that means there are others. Many others. As Duncan leaves the courtroom a free man, the government believes the danger has passed. In reality, the real investigation has just begun. Trials end. Questions don't. Long after the ABC case fades from the headlines, one moment from the courtroom refuses to leave Duncan Campbell's mind. It wasn't part of the prosecution's strategy. It wasn't in the official charges. It slipped out by accident. A witness mentioned a British signals intelligence unit based in Cyprus. The reaction had been instant and unmistakable. The judge cut the testimony short. The name of the unit was banned from being spoken aloud. Prosecutors scrambled as if something far more dangerous than a legal argument had just been exposed. That response told Duncan everything he needed to know. If this base was so sensitive it couldn't even be named in open court, then it wasn't just monitoring local communications. It had to be doing something far larger, something global. And if one such facility existed, it raised an unavoidable question. How many others were there? Duncan began replaying the fragments he already knew. The listening posts hinted at in declassified documents. The unexplained budgets. The technical references that never quite resolved into a complete picture. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they suggested a pattern. The trial that was meant to end Duncan's curiosity had sharpened it instead. What he had uncovered so far wasn't the secret itself, it was a doorway. A glimpse of a system deliberately designed to stay invisible. Duncan understood the risk. He'd already been arrested once. He'd already seen how quickly the state could move to shut him down. But there was no turning back. Because once you realize that entire populations may be under surveillance without their knowledge, the question stops being academic. It becomes moral. And from that moment on, Duncan Campbell commits himself to finding the rest of the network, wherever it leads and whatever it costs. The early 1980s arrive, and Duncan Campbell's life begins to diverge from everyone around him. While other journalists chase elections, scandals, and celebrity stories, Duncan disappears into places most reporters never visit. Dusty libraries. Obscure government archives. Back rooms filled with declassified papers that almost no one reads. He's chasing something that doesn't officially exist. The work is slow and punishing. There are no leaks, no whistleblowers calling in the middle of the night. Just fragments. A budget memo that doesn't line up. A technical manual that assumes infrastructure no civilian is supposed to know about. Telecommunications records that hint at interception on a scale far beyond their stated purpose. Most of his nights are spent alone, hunched over documents, running calculations that feel closer to engineering than journalism. Satellite orbits traced with pencil and ruler. Radio frequency bands mapped against known transmission paths. Microwave links plotted to see where signals might be diverted and collected. It's tedious. It's isolating. And most of the time, it leads nowhere. Dead ends pile up. Weeks of work collapse into nothing. His savings drain away on travel to remote locations that turn out to be irrelevant. Colleagues quietly move on with their careers, while Duncan remains fixed on a question no editor seems eager to publish. But the deeper he goes, the clearer one thing becomes. The gaps are too consistent to be accidental. Defense procurement reports are redacted in the same places. Technical references repeat across documents that are supposedly unrelated. Pieces from different countries begin to mirror each other in ways that suggest coordination. This isn't random secrecy. It's architecture. Duncan keeps going, year after year, driven by a conviction that somewhere, buried beneath the paperwork and silence, there's a system waiting to be mapped. Most people would have stopped long ago. Duncan doesn't. Because he's learned something crucial. The most powerful systems don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight, waiting for someone stubborn enough to connect the dots. The breakthrough doesn't come from a source inside government. It doesn't arrive in a sealed envelope or a whispered phone call. It comes from the trash. Near the Royal Air Force Base at Menwith Hill in North Yorkshire, peace activists have been camping for months. They protest the strange white domes that rise above the countryside, but like most people, they don't actually know what happens inside. Frustrated by the silence, they try something desperate. They raid the base's dumpsters. One day, they hand Duncan Campbell a bundle of discarded papers, maintenance logs, technical diagrams, internal notes, still damp from the rain. At first glance, it looks like another dead end. Pages of acronyms. Procurement codes. Technical language stripped of context. Duncan flips through the stack, his initial excitement fading. Then he sees it. A fragment of text on a maintenance log. A project name. Echelon. At first, it sounds almost fictional, like something pulled from a spy novel. But as Duncan keeps reading, the word appears again. And again. On diagrams of antenna arrays. In memos about satellite receivers. In references to intelligence sharing with partner nations. The same code name, scattered across documents that were never meant to be read together. This time, Duncan's hands shake, not from fear, but from recognition. This isn't a rumor. It isn't speculation. It's a label. A name attached to a system large enough to require constant maintenance, shared infrastructure, and international coordination. For the first time in years, the pieces stop drifting. They begin to lock into place. Duncan knows exactly what he's holding. Not the whole picture, but the key that proves the picture exists. The network he's been chasing finally has an identity. And now that it has a name, it can be mapped. Once the system has a name, it can be traced. With Echelon as his anchor, Duncan Campbell accelerates his investigation. The work becomes less about guessing and more about confirmation. He starts with physics. Communication satellites don't wander randomly through space. Geostationary satellites hang at fixed points above the Earth, parked in narrow orbital slots. If you know where they are, you can calculate where a ground station must be positioned to intercept their signals. Duncan plots the orbits. Then he maps the microwave transmission paths that carry those signals back to Earth. The math narrows the possibilities. Certain locations begin to stand out. In the Australian outback, a remote facility known as Pine Gap emerges as a critical node. Its satellite antennas hidden beneath white domes, its operations so secret that even Australian politicians aren't allowed inside. In Britain, Menwith Hill fits perfectly into the geometry. 33 satellite antennas, covered by 19 white domes, all angled toward the same bands of sky. In New Zealand, a quiet valley guarded by sheep and silence hides dishes pointed upward, intercepting traffic from across the Pacific. In Canada, a remote facility quietly links into the same streams of data. In the United States, NSA outposts buried in the mountains of West Virginia and the forests of Washington state complete the circuit. These aren't independent spy bases. They're nodes, connected parts of a single, globe-spanning interception network. And above all of them, the same 5 flags appear again and again. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Five Eyes Alliance. Together, they operate a system capable of intercepting communications on a planetary scale, not just military traffic, but civilian phone calls, radio transmissions, and data links moving through commercial satellites. As the picture sharpens, Duncan becomes acutely aware of something else. This isn't abstract research anymore. He knows the surveillance hasn't stopped following him. The tails, the phone clicks, the sense of being watched never disappears. Every step he takes toward exposing Echelon, someone inside the system is documenting his movements. By now, Duncan understands the unspoken rule. You can study the machine from a distance. But once you start naming its components, it notices you back. And in 1987, the machine decides to respond. By 1987, Duncan Campbell has done what the system was designed to prevent. He hasn't stolen documents. He hasn't leaked secrets. He has simply connected what was already visible. And that, it turns out, is enough. Shortly after his findings begin circulating among journalists and peace activists, the response arrives, quietly, officially, and without explanation. Duncan is arrested. There is no dramatic raid. No public spectacle. Just a sudden shift from researcher to suspect. He is charged under the Official Secrets Act. The accusation isn't that he spied for a foreign power. It's that he understood too much. 4 months, Duncan lives under legal uncertainty. His work stalls. His movements narrow. Friends grow cautious. Sources fall silent. The message is unmistakable. This is what happens when you name the machine. Even as the case drags on, the surveillance doesn't ease. His phone lines remain unreliable. His mail arrives late or opened. He feels watched in ways that can't be proven, only endured. But something unexpected happens. Instead of silencing him, the pressure hardens his resolve. Because now, the story is no longer theoretical. If Echelon didn't exist, there would be no need to stop him from describing it. The arrest becomes evidence. Not written on paper, but etched into his life. Eventually, the charges begin to weaken. The case loses momentum. The state backs away without apology, without acknowledgement. But the damage is already done. Duncan understands the new reality. The machine won't admit it exists, but it will punish anyone who proves that it does. And somewhere inside that network, someone has made a calculation. Stopping one journalist is easier than stopping the truth. By the late 1980s, the story has slipped beyond any single person's control. Duncan Campbell is no longer working alone. His findings circulate through investigative journalists, peace groups, and members of the European Parliament who begin asking questions that governments are not prepared to answer. What began as fragments now forms a pattern too large to ignore. Reports emerge describing Echelon as a global interception system, one that collects satellite communications indiscriminately, filtering them using keyword searches to flag names, locations, and topics. Not military targets. Everyone. For the first time, the accusation isn't coming from activists or outsiders. It's coming from inside democratic institutions. In Europe, lawmakers demand explanations. Parliamentary committees open inquiries. Written questions are submitted, then quietly deflected. Governments respond the only way they can. They deny everything. Officials insist no such system exists. They claim cooperation is limited. They argue national laws prevent abuse. But the denials don't line up. Too many facilities. Too many shared antennas. Too many countries operating in perfect synchronization. The public begins to notice the contradiction. If Echelon is imaginary, why are its components so real? Why are bases like Menwith Hill and Pine Gap expanding instead of shrinking? Why do governments refuse to even confirm their purpose? The silence becomes its own answer. Media coverage spreads beyond Britain. International outlets begin reporting on the possibility of mass surveillance carried out by allied democracies against civilian populations. What was once a fringe concern is now a legitimacy crisis. The machine was built to be invisible. But now, millions of people are looking directly at it. And for the first time, the system faces a threat it was never designed to handle. Public awareness. By the early 1990s, Echelon is no longer a secret whispered among specialists. It has been named, mapped, discussed in parliaments and printed in newspapers. And yet, nothing officially exists. No government formally confirms the system. No leader admits responsibility. No public apology is ever offered. Instead, the story fades, not because it was disproven, but because it became inconvenient. The facilities remain. Menwith Hill continues operating, its white domes multiplying across the landscape. Pine Gap expands deeper into the Australian desert. The satellite dishes in New Zealand keep turning, quietly aligned with the same narrow slices of sky. The network never shuts down. It simply learns. Governments become more careful with language. Oversight committees are created with limited access. Legal frameworks are adjusted, not to dismantle surveillance, but to normalize it. What once sounded unthinkable becomes administrative. For Duncan Campbell, the outcome is personal. He is not celebrated. He is not vindicated in court. He is not proven right by any official record. But he survives. And more importantly, the idea survives with him. The idea that massive systems of power don't need leaks to be exposed. They only need patience, pattern recognition, and the courage to keep asking why. Years later, when new revelations emerge about digital surveillance, metadata collection, and mass interception, the shock feels familiar. The architecture is different. The logic is not. Echelon was never an anomaly. It was a prototype. A proof of concept for a world where communication itself becomes the battlefield, and privacy the collateral damage. The machine didn't disappear. It went quiet. And once you know it's there, the silence is the loudest part.